Okay, so I'd like to introduce you to the new unit this morning. We're looking at CPP BDN 4011, and that is preparing documentation for building approval. So when we think about building approval, what's that really saying to us? Any ideas? Building approval. It's kind of before and after you build. So it's the end of the design process. It's when you've developed your set of working drawings. So a full set of documentation that you can give to any builder, and that they can then construct from those drawings. So it's construction issue drawings. But also in the Northern Territory and all over Australia, we have a building permit application process, which is known as building approval. And so before anything is ever built on site, you have to obtain what's called a building permit. Okay? Building permits are issued by professionals called building surveyors or building certifiers. They're also known as officially building surveyors, but people generally refer to them as the certifier. And that person issues the building permit. They also do lots of site inspections during construction, and then at the end of construction, they will issue what's known as an occupancy permit, meaning your building is now ready to be occupied. In other words, it can be used for whatever purpose it was built for. So that's the process in a nutshell. So it's called certification, and it's how we ensure that buildings in Australia are compliant with. What would they be compliant with in this process? NCC. And Australian standards as well. So NCC, National Construction Code. For those of you, we looked at the National Construction Code very early on in the first few units. This is National Construction Code Volume 1, National Construction Code Volume 2. As we know, Volume 1 deals with our Class 2 to 9 buildings, all our high-rise residential commercial buildings, and the NCC Volume 2 is all our dwelling houses, Class 1 and Class 10 buildings. Okay? So we'll be revising all of this morning, but these books are basically going to be our Bibles through this unit, a little bit like the planning scheme was for planning. In this unit, the NCC is going to be our guiding documents that we need to comply with. The NCC, slightly bigger than the planning scheme. It's a little bit more arduous and onerous to comply with the NCC than it is the planning scheme, but it's what we must do in the design process. So we've gone through the last couple of units. We came up with our concept design when you were doing your Revit with Spiros. We built the model of what was our concept, what we thought the building would be. Then we took it through the planning process, because obviously that happens earlier in design so that you can ensure that you can actually build that building by obtaining planning consent. And now we can assume that we've got our planning consent and we're going to take that project through the next stage. And this is the real heavy documentation stage where we really put all the information we need on the drawing for two purposes. One, compliance with the NCC, and the second is so that the builder can actually build from this set of drawings. If the builder doesn't have all the information on the drawings, what happens? Well, what tends to happen? No, they tend to still build. The builder makes design decisions, not the designer, okay? So if you leave things off the drawing and the builder doesn't know what to do, but he has to build something, sometimes he might call you as the designer and ask for your input or another drawing or more detail. Sometimes he won't or she won't. They will just continue to build, and they will make a decision on site on the day, and they will just continue with the build. And whether you like it or not, if it's not on your drawings, that's what's going to get built. Okay, so to avoid that scenario, we want our drawings to be of a standard that doesn't really rely on the builder for any design decisions. We want to be making all those design decisions now, putting them into our working drawings, and so that we control what's actually the end product, the building actually looks like, okay? And also because, more importantly, I suppose the focus of this particular unit is that we ensure compliance with the National Construction Code, because if you leave something off the drawings, that is a clause in the NCC refers to, and you leave it off the drawings, probably what will happen is that when you apply for your building permit, if the certifier realises that he doesn't have that information on your drawings, he won't issue you the building permit. He'll ask you for more information, so you're going to have to do more drawings for him anyway, or her. So that's the situation. So we have to be methodical in how we approach doing our working drawings so that we don't leave out issues, okay? Anyway, let's look at our unit outline. This unit of competency specifies the outcome required to gather and prepare documentation that complies with the building approval requirements, including detailed working drawings of designs for all types of residential, commercial and industrial buildings, as defined by the Building Code of Australia. First and foremost, can everybody know that the Building Code of Australia, the BCA, is basically the same thing as the National Construction Code, okay? So it used to always be referred to as BCA, the Building Code of Australia, and more recently, I don't know, about 5 years ago, it had a retitle to NCC, the National Construction Code. So if you're reading BCA or you're reading NCC, it's referring to this same document, okay? This used to be known as the BCA. So it actually says National Construction Code Series, Building Code of Australia, Class 2. It's like a subheading now, the BCA is. So we'll just write that up. So NCC/BCA. So lots of documents you read, because they haven't been revised in the last few years, will still refer to the BCA. But when you're writing a reference now in 2019, I want you to use NCC, okay? That's the most up-to-date reference to these documents, NCC code. The documentation is required as part of the building approval process. So that's also important to note, that the documentation, the working drawings, are just part of this building approval process. Okay, so a little bit like when we did planning, we had the application form, you know, we had the owner's letter of consent. There are other supporting documents that you're going to need for the building approval process as well as your working drawings, but primarily as draftspersons, we will be concentrating on what detail needs to go into the working drawings. And so the unit supports drafters who assist and work under the supervision and instruction of an architect or a building designer to gather this range of documents as part of the building approval process. And I would like to say at this point, what we're asking you to do, and to get it absolutely perfect, like a whole set of working drawings on a whole building permit application, is really quite a large feet of work. Maybe not for a dwelling house, but as we get towards the bigger buildings, it's large, and in a normal work environment, there could be a team of people putting together that documents. When I've worked on really large projects like, you know, Palmerston Hospital, for instance, this process would be spread over maybe 10 people, all different engineers and their own drafts people working with them, maybe 10 to 20, I would have said. Architects, engineers, a whole design team working together, and the design period would probably lasted 9 months to a year for that project. So this is not a small piece of work. Working drawings are the largest piece of work that goes on in an office. Okay, so we will go into it in as much detail as we can, going through the BCA, but you know, we have to be realistic. We've got, 4 weeks to get through this unit, and you guys are not going to know every single thing in those 2 books in 4 weeks. Nobody does. Well, even most people working in the industry don't know everything in those 2 books. There's a lot of, not only, the books mightn't look very big in themselves, but then the books refer you to lots of different Australian standards and other guidance documents. So, you know, it's a massive mountain of work, and you find that plumbers know their part of the NCC very well, to do with, you know, pipe work and heating installations, and you know, the air conditioning guys will know their part about air conditioning and ductwork very well. The engineers know all the structural side very well. The electrical guys will know their part of the NCC. But we as draftspeople, we tend to be the people who have to pull all that information together. You know, so we need to know a little bit of everything, and we need to know a lot about what needs to go on the drawings. So we're going to concentrate predominantly on that, because it's not possible to absolutely cover everything in great detail. Okay, just the second part of your unit outline there, or sorry, that's the student assessment guide. When we look at the student assessment guide, we're going to be using the same 3 projects that we used for planning. So we'll be doing our dwelling house in Zuccoli again, but looking at developing it up into a set of working drawings. So we will plan the building permit approval application process and collect the supporting documentation. We'll review and resolve construction requirements of the project. We'll prepare and check the working drawings, an application documentation for building permit approval, and finalise the building permit approval process. So again, using the planning application documentation you created in 4010, you are to further develop these drawings to a standard fit for the purpose of application for building permit. To complete this exercise, you will begin by using the Revit file from 4010, saving this file under the new job number, and editing the Revit file to suit the requirements for a set of working drawings. And when you do submit your application or your submission for this unit or for this AT1, you'll be sending me PDFs of the emails that you send requesting documentation from other consultants. So last unit we used the RFIs. This unit you'll simply be sending me emails requesting information from me, because RFIs are a very official way to ask for information, and you could use an RFI in this situation, but just to chop it and change it around a little bit, we'll be just using the email process, because these are all standard methods of communication between construction professionals, and let's give email a go for this one. To manage our emails. So we will be making lots of checklists as always, and we will submit this completed checklist. We'll be doing our working drawings. We'll have a markup set that I will go through with you, and then we'll have the working drawings, the finals, and you'll have your application form, so that's your application for the building permit. Snips of your file structure as always, and a copy of your Revit file. That's what you'll need to submit. Okay, so very much same sort of structure as we have done for other units, but this one is pretty detailed. Okay, I won't go through any more of that. I just want to... The unit outline we just went through before. As usual, we have our work health and safety instructions just for ourselves. There won't be any site visits in this unit. It'll be a lot about preparing drawings here in the studio. As usual, you know, keep the place tidy, keep your bags nice and neat under your desk, nobody trips on them. The usual work health and safety instructions for the studio. We've also got our student support services if any of you feel that you may need any of that. Recognition of prior learning. If any of you have completed lots and lots of sets of working drawings previously, please let me know, and we can look at RPLing, or recognition of prior learning, for that. Reasonable adjustments, of course, as always. If you've got any issues that you need to discuss with me, I'm always ready to listen. And you've got your student administration, equity services, and complaints management unit if you need to avail of those university facilities. Okay, so today on session 1 and session 2, we're just going to have our class orientation, which we've pretty much just done. We're going to investigate the building permit application process itself. We'll be preparing our checklist for the building permit documentation requirements, research and clarify compliance requirements for Class 1 and Class 10 building projects. What does that mean? Research and clarify compliance. It basically means going through this book from beginning to end and identifying what clauses, and most of them do apply to most buildings, going through the whole thing and seeing what clauses apply to your project and how are you complying with them. Okay, so it's a fairly extensive checklist, and we'll be doing a lot of work on that today and tomorrow. And yeah, prepare your checklist for compliance. Okay. So we want to do the checklist first. We want to get that checklist together. We want to know all the clauses that we need to comply with. Once we have our checklist in place, then we can just get onto our drawings and actually implement those notes that we have on our checklist into our drawing set. Okay, any questions so far? All good. All right, now we're going to a bit of a change of pace. You can follow me. Okay, I'll go through that first. I will go to the process. So I'm going to go on to the Northern Territory Government website, a bit like we did for planning, and we're going to have a look at where does all this sit, you know, how does this work in terms of legislation. So we're on, I think I just typed in lands and planning. So if you go on home, lands and planning, building and planning, building legislation. If I just start on this page, it's the Building and Planning page on the Northern Territory Government website, and it's got a couple of headings under here. It's got the Building Certification Moratorium, which basically was all about, it's a scheme that had gone on in the NT. I think it's actually still ongoing. I think they extended the date on it, where they found that a lot of buildings, especially outside of the Darwin area, out in the other areas of the Northern Territory, had no building permit and no occupancy permit, and nobody really knew if they'd ever been built to the building code, the NCC, the National Construction Code, and so they sort of had this grace period where you could apply, you hadn't committed any offence or anything by saying that your building wasn't compliant, but you could apply and try and get a certifier to go out and visit your building and see what needed to happen to it to upgrade it and make it compliant. And it's just a scheme that had run, so we're not really going to look into that. Then we have the building legislation itself, which we certainly are going to go into. We've got historic building legislation, which I suppose is still on the website because sometimes buildings are very old and you want to go back and look at what was legislation when it was actually built. And then we've got the planning legislation, which we looked at in the last unit. So we're just going to go straight in here into the building legislation, and we see a lot of acts. Now we're a little bit familiar with acts from the previous unit because we had the Planning Act. So the last unit we had Planning Act, Planning Regulations, and Planning Scheme. Yeah? 3 documents. The Act is the law. The regulations tend to set out timelines, how the process works itself within the Northern Territory. And then the scheme was the everyday document that we ended up using quite a bit, didn't we? Where we actually find the clauses. So planning regulations, or building regulations are actually quite similar. So we have 2 documents. We've got the Building Act and we've got the Building Regulations, and then we've got the NCC. So the Building Act will reference the NCC and say that in the Northern Territory you need to comply with the NCC. Okay? But if the Act wasn't there, then who would have told you that you actually needed to comply with this? Nobody. So the Act needs to be there as the act of law that makes it legal or illegal for you not to comply with it. Okay? Can't just decide to buy a piece of land and build a house and not comply with it. It's illegal. So we've got quite a number of acts here that we should probably just have a quick look at while we're here. We're not going to go into any of the rest of them, but we've got the Architects Act, Architects Regulations, Building Act and the Building Regulations, which are the 2 we are going to have a look at. Building and Fidelity Fund Schemes Regulations of 2012. And then you've got, these are just amendments to this particular one. So this is a 2012 amendment, and again, we've got a resolution of residential building work disputes regulations 2012. We've got construction contracts, which is another act there, all about the actual contracts themselves, meaning between the client and the builder. The Plumbers and Drainers Licensing Act, so you do need to be registered to be a plumber in the Northern Territory, and then you would need to abide by this act and regulations. The Swimming Pool Safety Act and Swimming Pool Safety Regulations, which you may come across in your career at some point if your design includes swimming pools. And then we've got the Valuation of Land Act and the Valuation of Land Regulations, again to do with putting a value on a piece of land where there's maybe perhaps no building. So we're going to dive straight in and we're going to look at the actual building regulations themselves. Now, I have given you a copy of the first two there in the OneDrive, which is really all you need. We'll just have a quick look through the building regulations. If you click on that link. Not sure how I can make that any bigger. Now, I'm not going to read through the whole Building Act because we could be here for a long time. But we're going to just have a quick look at what the Act, or what the building, did I just click on the regulations instead of the Act? I did. So, Building Act 1993. As enforced at the 1st of May 2016 was the last time it was updated, okay? Can you see, Despina? If I'm standing in your way, let me know. Okay. So, I'm just going to go down through this. Part 2 there, we come to building administration. We have in the Northern Territory a Director of Building Control. The current Director of Building Control is a man called Mark Meldrum. Very nice guy, and he has a lot of functions and powers, which we might have a brief look at there, and it actually tells us there on page 9. There's also the Building Advisory Committee. So the Building Advisory Committee is a committee of industry professionals who are appointed by the Minister for Lands and Planning, and those people then advise the Minister of any changes that may be required within the Act or the regulations, or even within the NCC code. If that committee decides that something in the NCC code isn't working particularly well in the Northern Territory, or they find that perhaps builders are finding a way around the code for a particular incident, then they can advise the Minister of that, and either the Act or the regulations or the NCC code can be adapted to suit the Northern Territory. And then we've got the Building Practitioners Board. So the Building Practitioners Board is yet another committee that's set up under this legislation, and they look at registering building professionals in the Northern Territory, and we're going to have a look at that part of the website later on. Currently, you need to be registered to be a building certifier, so to be the person who signs off on building permits and occupancy permits. You need to be registered to be an architect. You need to be registered to practice as an architect. You need to be registered to be a builder, but for residential buildings only, not for commercial buildings, which is a little bit of controversy in the Northern Territory at the moment. And then also you need to be registered to be a plumber, to be an electrician. There's a few others. We'll look at that list later on. But the Building Practitioners Board looks at who is allowed to be registered in these particular qualifications and under these particular professions, and what qualifications do they have. What's the minimum qualification you can have to call yourself one of these professions and practice in the Northern Territory. So the Building Appeals Board, we'll look at the functions and powers of them in a moment. You get delegations by the Minister, which we kind of came across in planning. So the Minister can delegate their power to another person, perhaps working for government, as can the Director of Building Control. And then we go down, we've got Division 1 registration. So the registration of building practitioners. And it sets out who can be, what they can be, determinations by the Minister, all of that sort of thing. Audit of building practitioners by the Director. So the Director of Building Control in the Northern Territory has the power to audit a building contractor. We have to remember that especially when consumers or customers, our clients, go to build a house, it's most likely going to be the most expensive payment they ever make in their lives, okay? So you're talking about, paying out $400,000 to $600,000. Hey, Seven. And, sorry, I've got a bit of a cold. And, it's a lot of money. So we really needed something in our legislation to protect those consumers, okay? And it turns out that we have the power to audit building practitioners, because what had happened in a number of cases was Sahar was building a house and she gave over her 400,000 to the builder. The builder went bankrupt and Sahar lost her 400,000 and didn't end up with a house. Okay, so that's not, you know, most people, most working, normal, everyday, middle class, lower class income people can't afford to lose 400,000 in their lifetime and, you know, still end up with another house somewhere else. So we really needed to protect the consumer in this regard, especially when it came to domestic dwelling houses. So this power was set up by the Act, and the director has the power to audit the contractors. So it kind of means that if you want to be a building contractor, you have to be able to prove that you've got like at least $1 million. I'm now guessing figures here, but say you need to prove that you've got $1 million in your bank account before you build Sahar's $400,000 house. Why is that? Because I want to know you're not going to go bankrupt. I want to know you're going to finish that house for her. If she gives you the money, you're not going to run off and skip town with it and never be seen again, because it had been happening in the Northern Territory, and we needed to protect our consumers from this type of, well, mostly the builders were genuine people and they genuinely went bankrupt, but, you know, that's because they weren't managing their own businesses very well, you know, and that's okay, you know, if, I don't know, you buy your TV from Harvey Norman and Harvey Norman goes bankrupt and you lose your warranty, no big deal, you can probably survive that, but if you lose your house over it, it's a much bigger deal. So inquiries by the Building Practitioners Board, they also have, they can look at different individuals who are practicing and look at their behaviour, misconduct, failure to meet registration requirements. There was a misconduct case taken against a building certifier. These are all public. They're all on the website. You can read up about them. First time ever though, I saw a building certifier be suspended for 2 years. She had given a building permit to a demountable structure, and demountable structures are not supposed to have be under this scheme at all. It's only, you're only supposed to have building permits for actual buildings. She had issued the builder who was building a normal dwelling house, slab on ground dwelling house, didn't have the funds in his bank account, and then couldn't apply for what's called Fidelity Fund insurance, which we'll come to later on, to cover the build of this house, okay? And so she issued a permit to him saying that the house was a demountable structure because he didn't have to have the monies and the insurances in place to build a demountable structure. But she knew very well it wasn't a demountable structure, it was a normal type dwelling, and he got the building permit, he built the house, but this all came out in the wash when she got audited, and she got suspended for 2 years for doing that. So she was doing a bit of a favour to the builder. She'd obviously worked with him before, and, you know, you have to remember, it's all very, you can do this, and you can do this, and you can't do that. But we all work in the same industry together, so it's also about relationships, and also who's employing certifiers. Certifiers in the Northern Territory are private businesses. They're private people. They're not government officials. Whereas in most other jurisdictions in Australia, the building certifiers actually work for the local council and they're government officials. But it's difficult in the Northern Territory for the certifiers because who hires the certifier? 9 times out of 10, it's the builder. So you're hired by the builder. That builder is paying you to come out and do inspections and to provide you with building permits and occupancy permits. But you, as the certifier, are the person who needs to go to the builder and say, you're doing this wrong, you're doing that wrong, I'm going to stop your build, I'm going to... So it's very difficult to give those instructions to the hand that feeds you. Do we get that? Are you following me on that? So it's a little bit different because they're private individuals and it's set up as a private company here. David?
With that case, at what point did it go wrong? As in, like, when did they go, okay, actually,
So somebody must have said something somewhere along the way, and the certifier got audited. And when the paperwork was gone through, it was seen on the paperwork that she had written it was a demountable structure, and on inspection it obviously wasn't. So it just takes one person to ring the Director of Building Control and there's an investigation. I don't know what instigated the actual investigation, but something did. Certifiers also get audited routinely as well, so they'll just pick a project and audit it. So, you know, that's how government makes sure that the certifiers aren't becoming corrupt as well. Having said that, almost all certifiers I've worked with here have been absolutely straight down the line, and they want you to comply with the National Construction Code. There are people, individuals, clients, who will actively seek out certifiers who will do the wrong thing. Please, in your careers, don't get involved with people like that, okay? Because those things only ever have a certain lifespan, okay? Somebody somewhere will always realize what's happening, and you know, so you don't want to be involved in that. Our role as draftspeople is to design and document buildings that are compliant with the NCC. We're not in the business of trying to find the shortcuts and the ways around it, okay? Just know that that's not your role to do that. It definitely is your role to do a very intelligent design and maybe comply, but without all the frills and niceties, but be compliant. But it is not your role to try and avoid compliance on your client's behalf. And any clients that are asking you to do that are out of line for a start, and you don't need to be involved at all. Also, if you're working for someone who wants you to do things like that, I'll be not interested. It's a much nicer profession to be in if you're actually doing the right thing than doing the wrong thing. Okay, so appeals, of course, there's appeal process then, as there is in any other laws if there's action brought against you. Building certifiers, who they are, functions of the certifier. Building certifier or director may rely on certificate. Okay, so there are times that the building certifier won't be able to cover every eventuality. A very typical one of that is structural engineering. So some certifiers are certifiers and they're also structural engineers. However, if you're a certifier, you don't have to be a structural engineer. That's a completely separate qualification. And you may have structural engineers going out to site to do structural inspections. So, you know, they're going to want to know what concrete was put in there, what strength it was. Is all the reinforcement in place? Is, you know, are the correct amount of columns, obviously, in a building, those types of things. So the structural engineer goes out and inspects all of that. How does the structural engineer then decide to tell the building certifier that everything is okay structurally in the building? So it's done through a certificate known as a Section 40. Okay, so we have Section 40s for design and we have Section 40s for construction. Okay, so and the name Section 40 is coming from the actual Building Act here. If a certifier is relying on a certificate from another professional, could be a structural engineer, could be an electrician, could be a plumber, could be hydraulics engineer, then that Section 40 is signed by the engineer and given to the building certifier. A certifier does not have to accept any Section 40 from anyone unless he is suitably, you know, confident that the person he's taking the certificate from is qualified and has the relevant experience to be able to say that that building was built in accordance with the National Construction Code. Because that's what a Section 40 is saying. It's saying that the slab has been designed and is built in accordance with the National Construction Code. And the certifier is then relying on those certificates from the other disciplines for the final occupancy permit or for the building permit. Who signs the building permit? Certifier. So when the certifier signs the building permit, he or she then takes responsibility. Okay, so they may rely on all these other certificates from the other people coming in. There'll be design certificates for the building permit. There'll be construction certificates for the occupancy permit. And when they rely on those other certificates, they do so in good faith because it's, at the end of the day, it's the building certifier whose name is on the building permit and the occupancy permit. And if legal comeback is needed for any particular reason, it's the certifier who will be up in court because it's his name on the building permit or an occupancy permit. So this is probably a good system because the certifier is very careful about who he relies on for his Section 40 certificates. Okay. So I won't go through too much more about on the Act itself. It talks about, you know, the auditors, building permits, when are building permits required, applications, the grant of building permits. It's the whole process, okay? And then we go, the next part is the process, part 8 there, about the occupancy permits. We said the occupancy permits are given at the time of completion of a building. So the certifier, on final inspection, that certifier has to be absolutely 100% that everything that has been built on that site is compliant with the National Construction Code, and only then will he sign the occupancy permit. You do often hear of people moving into buildings before the occupancy permit is has been issued. Just know that you should never recommend that to a client, that they should move in before an occupancy permit is signed off. A lot of that is to do with insurances. Quite often your own home insurance won't cover you until after the occupancy permit has been signed off. So be very careful in doing that. I had one client one time, the construction was just finishing days before Christmas, and they were dying to get moved in before Christmas, and they really wanted to be back in this house, and, you know, the occupancy permit wasn't signed, and, you know, I told them that you can move back in, you can have your Christmas in your house, but you haven't, the case will be that you haven't got an occupancy permit, and it's completely at your own risk. If the house goes on fire, if something happens, your insurance may not cover you in that instance. So I actually think they didn't actually move in at all until after Christmas. Exemptions. So there are some exemptions. Temporary occupation of buildings. There's all different other clauses as we get down that are exempt. Emergency protection works. Building notices by the building certifier. So the certifier might give you a notice during the works. The building certifier can come on site, and if he's not happy with something, he can actually stop the work on site. Seemingly, it's never actually happened in the Northern Territory that the certifier is actually called a work stop, but it's very serious, because if you call a work stop on site, if something, I don't know, a slab has been laid and it's not compliant or something like that, you can't, as a certifier, you can't allow the work to continue on site, because it's always going to be wrong, and you can't fix it if you build the rest of the building on top of it. But the cost of even stopping a large building site for, you know, even more than a day or 2 days is enormous. So, you know, it's a very serious thing to do. And we by the building permit design, you know, so the certifier gets that set of working drawings and he reads it in detail before any work starts on site. So one would hope that the process is set up sufficiently that the certifier will find any errors and non-compliances before he issues the building permit, as opposed to finding them when the building's on site. And that's why the process is two-part: building permit, occupancy permit. Morning. Okay, so that's our Building Act. You're more than welcome to have a read through the Building Act yourselves. I do not need you to know every word of the Building Act at all. I just need you to know that the Building Act exists, and it is the master document, and it's why all these processes happen in Australia, and most especially in the Northern Territory. The next document is the building regulations themselves. The building regulations gets to be a bit more of a technical document, a bit like the planning regulations. The building regulations sets out how we do the application, the time for the supply of additional information, who's the reporting authority, access to records, for instance, inspections, when will they happen? What else would we have there? Occupancy certification. Limitation of time for reporting authorities in relation to occupancy certification. Change of use. So it's really setting out timelines. I always think of regulations as a document that sets out the timelines for the process. Who is responsible for what in this whole process? Because remember, the certifier themselves, even though they're private in the Northern Territory, they take all the documentation, but when they issue the building permit, they lodge all of the working drawings, all of the Section 40 certificates, all of the supporting documentation, the application form for the building permit and the actual building permit itself. They lodge that whole bundle of documentation with the Department of Planning and Logistics, okay? So a record of that building permit is kept for all time in the building branch. Do you remember speaking about the building branch before? What else do we do at the building branch? Remember at the very beginning of a project, we might all go to the building branch with our little form, and the owner will have given us access to the building branch files. What are we going to find there? We're going to find any application for building permit or any application for occupancy permit that was ever made on that lot. Okay? It's a great source of information because, and I have to say, 20, 30, 40 years ago, the building permit process and the occupancy permit process wasn't as strict and as regulated as it is now. So the drawings aren't of the same standard as we would expect to be in a working drawing set now. But if you want to do work on a building that is 30 or 40 years old, you can go into the building branch. And in the Northern Territory, we're quite lucky. Almost all of our buildings have some sort of set of plans that were developed as part of this building permit, occupancy permit process back when it was built. Okay, and we continue that process today. So the set of working drawings you're going to prepare in this unit were to be for a real building, and were to go through the actual process, the certifier would lodge that set of documents with the building permit and with the occupancy permit post-construction with the department. And this is a document here. The building regulations sets out how all of that process works. What does the certifier have to lodge? When does he have to lodge it? So the reliance on certificates, about what we talked about there, where you're taking certificates from the other practitioners, how all that works, protection of adjoining properties, obviously within building works, how do you protect them, forms of building notice, building orders. These are all documents that certifiers and the department deal with quite regularly. I just want to make you aware of them. I'm not trying to make you know this process inside out. If you were going to become a certifier, I would, but you're not. You just need to know what the process is and why it is the way it is, and that's why we're talking about these documents now. So in that handout, for those who just arrived, regulations and codes, we're just working our way down through that. We've just talked about the Building Act. This is the building regulations we're looking at here. It talks about areas liable to flooding, building practitioners, subclasses of building practitioners. That's the net asset certificate. That's the certificate a builder needs to have. What are your builder's net assets? Okay? If you were going to build a house tomorrow, and I said to you, your builder only has $200 in his bank account, would you be delighted to hand over your money to him? Or would you want to know exactly what he's got in his bank account and how he can back up your build and not go bankrupt in the process? Remembering that when a builder is building a house, so we talked a little bit about progress payments before, didn't we? Maybe. I'll talk a little bit about it now. So for a dwelling house, it's not so common. But it can be. So you remember when you're building a building, like the build itself can last anywhere between 6 months and 2 years maybe for a really large project, even longer for a really major project. But we'll say that's about the limit on it. So it's not like, going shopping, how will I say this? It's not like, going shopping at Coles and you pick up all your groceries and you put your trolley through the checkout and then you just pay. Okay? So that builder has to carry the cost of your build over that 6 months or over that 2-year period. Okay? And it's not, I suppose it's not acceptable to think that the builder himself is going to be able to do that. So we have a process called progress payments. So what happens is that usually on a monthly basis, the builder will invoice for the work that he has completed on site that month. Okay? What generally happens is that whoever is your project manager or your architect, engineer, building designer, they will go out to site and they will assess what work has been carried out that month, and then they will either approve or disapprove the progress payment. So sometimes you have to be careful because builders might claim they've done more work than they have, and you don't want to be the client who's actually paid for more work than's been done. So if you've paid for your house to have slab, blockwork walls, up to roof level but no roof. If you've paid for the house to be at that stage, and the builder goes bankrupt, but all he's done is prepared the ground, he hasn't actually laid the slab, you've now paid for a slab and walls that aren't actually on site. So you never want to be in that situation. You never want to put your client in that situation, okay? So progress payments, monthly payments, should always be itemized by the builder, what work has been done, inspected, what work has actually been carried out on site, progress payment approved, client pays a progress payment, okay? So for your house that's worth 400,000 over 6 months, you know, you might be paying 80,000 a month. When you go to get a mortgage at the bank, the bank will approve your mortgage, and they generally, a lot of banks, will only allow you to draw down the mortgage as per your progress payment. So they won't allow you to go out with the 400,000 in your back pocket. They'll say you can draw down the 80,000. They'll want evidence. They want to see the progress payment being signed off by your building designer or whoever's looking after your build for you, and they'll want to see the payment going. Sometimes the bank actually pay it directly from your account to the builder's account, so they know that the mortgage money is actually going directly to the build. Okay, so that's just a bit of background knowledge on that, but that's what we always want to make sure that the builder isn't going to go bankrupt, because we're always giving him large sums of money, and at any point, if the builder goes bankrupt, then we could, as a client and client's representative, we could be out of pocket. Okay, we don't want that to happen. So I'm just trying to flick down through to see what's relevant here. Owner builders, there is room in the regulations for us to be our own builder. If you want to be an owner builder, there is short courses you have to do. We have to make sure that you actually know what you're doing, but you can apply for a building permit yourself as an owner builder. So on the building permit application form, it does ask to name the builder, and the builder must be a registered builder for a Class 1A dwelling in the Northern Territory. All right. Just trying to find the bit. Okay. So this is the part that says that we need to use the National Construction Code. So it says in these regulations, the building regulations of the Northern Territory, the building code means the Building Code of Australia set out in Volume 1 and Volume 2 of the National Construction Code series. Okay, so that's where it's telling us that that's what we have to comply with, but there actually should be lots of definitions, as always, in these documents. Talks about some exemptions. I won't go too much into them. They're fairly minor in the Northern Territory, what's exempt. These are just definitions. Okay, I'm going to leave that because we really don't need to go through all of that, but it's just important that you know that we have a Building Act, we have a building regulations, and those documents send us to the National Construction Code, which is really our Bible and what we need to comply with in terms of working drawings and in terms of what needs to be on our drawings to apply for a building permit. Okay, I just want to look at so boards, committees and authorities. We've got the Building Advisory Committee, which is the one we just spoke about before. And this is the one that makes recommendations. So the Building Advisory Committee is a statutory body established by the Building Act. Its major role is to maintain industry input into the building control processes of the Northern Territory by advising the Minister on the administration of the Building Act, investigating and reporting to the Minister on all matters relating to the Act referred to it by the Minister, accrediting building products, construction methods, designs, components or systems, such as the deemed to comply manual, which we'll come back to later on, and other such functions as are imposed on it by legislation or as directed by the Minister. So I actually sit on this committee. This is a really quite a good committee to be part of, because it's very much at the forefront of changes in the Act and changes to regulations and changes to the National Construction Code and how they affect the Northern Territory. We'll talk about the deemed to comply manual now. So part of the work of the Building Advisory Committee is to look after a document or a series of documents called the NT Deemed to Comply Manual. This is very much unique in Australia in that we only have it here in the Northern Territory. And what it is because we are in the cyclonic region, there are lots of products on the market that can't be used in the cyclonic region. Why can't they be used in the cyclonic region? Because they were only ever designed for normal wind speeds and normal wind pressures. And if they were to be used in a cyclonic region, the likelihood is that they may get ripped off buildings, and we've seen evidence of this in Cyclone Tracy, and this was a result of that such a thing was developed here in the Northern Territory. So what we don't want is debris flying around the place in the event of a high wind event or a cyclone event. We understand that the roof sheeting might get ripped off the roof, and that will do horrible damage to the building. But the main concern is not the damage to the building. The main concern is what does the roof sheeting do if it flies into Bridget walking up the road with her little girl trying to get in to find some shelter, because flying debris causes so much significant damage obviously to people if they were outside, but to other buildings. So if you can think, we're here on the university campus, if the roof sheets were to fly off this building, not only would that damage this building terribly, but it would do damage to maybe 10 other buildings around it which were quite intact until this roof flew off, and all that flying debris did damage to other buildings. And that's what they found in Cyclone Tracy. It was the amount of debris that was flying around that did most of the damage. So the NT Deemed to Comply was developed to look at products, building products and components individually, and to look at how they perform in high winds and how they could be better fixed to the building, and to mean that they would stay secure in those high wind events. There is a test that's done on all the products in the NT Deemed to Comply manual. It's done rather bizarrely over in Cairns, over in James Cook University. They have a machine over there, a wind tunnel, and it simulates what happens in high wind events. And all of the products in the NT Deemed to Comply manual have been tested in actual high wind tunnel testing, and that's how they make it into the Deemed to Comply manual. So the Building Advisory Committee looks after what products actually get entered in the Deemed to Comply manual. Probably a good idea let's go have a look at it while we're on the website now anyway. So Deemed to Comply manual, I want you all to have a good look at this. I'll give you time this afternoon, tomorrow morning, to go and have a look around all these things that we're talking about today. But in the Deemed to Comply manual, so the NT Deemed to Comply manual is referenced in the Building Code of Australia Volume 2, NCC Volume 2, as an acceptable construction manual for high wind areas. The manual contains products or systems which have been assessed for structural adequacy for cyclonic wind loads approved by the NT Building Advisory Committee. These drawings can be accepted by architects, builders, building certifiers, designers, engineers as complying with the structural requirements of the NT Building Act and the structural requirements of the NCC. So there are huge parts of the NCC that tend not to apply to us because we're a cyclonic region, but we can, and it does limit very much the types of products we can use in our buildings. However, the NT Deemed to Comply manual does look at the more commonly used products. So when we're doing, how does this apply to us? So when we're doing a working drawing, instead of saying Colorbond Custom Orb fixed as per manufacturer's details, do we want to use the manufacturer's details? No, because the manufacturer's details are manufactured somewhere down south, and the manufacturer's details are only looking at what happens in, I don't know, Newcastle. Okay, it's not the manufacturer's details in general, and all building products don't look at how that material performs in high wind cyclonic areas. The NT deemed to comply manual does. So what has happened is that the manufacturers have gone off and they've done a set of drawings that are specific to cyclonic areas, and then these drawings have been approved by a group of structural engineers and architects and all those who sit on the Building Advisory Committee, and when they're approved, they're entered into the manual. So where the drawings for a product or system comprise multiple sheet sets, these will be indicated as sheet 1 of 3, 2 of 3, and so forth. Note that the drawings marked as withdrawn are provided for reference only, as they are no longer approved on new structures. Products or systems have been withdrawn at the request of the manufacturer or because the contact information has not been updated with the NT Building Advisory Committee. So it's a live manual. Products get added all the time, but products also get taken away. So they do sit in a library of superseded products, and we want them for reference. If you do find a building where they've been used before, you want to see how they were fixed. So a list of products added or removed in the past 3 months is provided on the search screen, and to see the list of products which have been withdrawn, select the status withdrawn. I'll show you how to use it in a moment. You can make an application to have your product, so any manufacturer of any product can apply to have their product included in the deemed to comply manual. And there's methods of application and all the rest of it there. Now, access to manual. This is what the deemed to comply manual of the Northern Territory looks like. You will use this so many times in your career. We'll give you some time to have a browse around here. But what happens on your actual working drawing if you want to use the deemed to comply manual? Well, it's easy. We're not saying ColourBond custom orb fixed as per manufacturer's details. We're going to say fixed as per deemed to comply number, and whatever the number is. Okay? It's very, very simple. What you're doing when you say that is, let's have a look. So these are the items that are included in the manual. So we've got battens, connectors, roller doors, shutters, louvers, fences, solar hot water and photovoltaic panel mounting systems is a miscellaneous category. We've got roof cladding and fixings, roof tiles and fixings, satellite dishes, skylights, shear wall racking panels, vents and wall cladding and fixings. So can you see the common theme there? Anything that might fly off your building in the event of a cyclone. Okay? So let's say we want to look at our ColourBond custom orb roof cladding. Okay? So you can put in your product title or manufacturer. The status is quite important. So when you're doing a search using the deemed to comply manual, make sure you use the current status, okay? Because if you're not using the current status, you might actually be using a product that's been withdrawn, okay? So use the current status, and it will just do a quick search, and it will give me all of the roofing products. So basically what I'm saying to you right now is this is a list of all the roofing products, metal cladding roofing products that you can use in Darwin, okay? If you decide that you've found a fantastic roofing product from another manufacturer that's not in the deemed to comply manual, know that you're going to also have to find a structural engineer who will be willing to certify or write a Section 40 for that product. And there aren't too many of them around. Okay? And what they'll tend to do is tell you, yeah, I can do that work. It'll probably cost you $25,000 just for me to certify it, because they're going to have to do all this wind testing and calculations and all the rest of it. So it probably costs most of these products around that kind of money to get into this manual. So this is our choice. Unfortunately, what it does mean for us as building designers is our choice is limited. We don't have the choice of all the products in Australia to put on our roof, okay? We have these choices. It used to irritate me quite a lot because there were lots of really good products coming out, cladding products for walls and roofs that had like the insulation within them. All the Kingspan products, there's a sample over there, this type of cladding. When I was doing lots of energy efficiency, And I really, really wanted to be able to use them because I could see huge benefits in terms of, oh no, I don't have the actual padding. So it's a panel, I thought I had one here. It's a panel that's got like metal on two sides and insulation in the middle, but it's not in the deemed to comply manual, so I wasn't able to use it in the Northern Territory. It will get there. Most products will get there eventually. So let's have a look at how we use the deemed to comply manual. So what we're looking for here is our ColourBond Custom Orb. So we've got Custom Blue Orb roofing for cyclonic regions. And what you need to start looking at here is, see this millimeters? So the standard Custom Orb we use is 0.48, I think, or 0.42. So Custom Blue, I believe Custom Blue is made for areas that are very close by the sea for corrosion. So this is the one I'm actually going to look for here. It's the Custom Orb roofing for cyclonic regions. 42 and 48 are all in the same one. So that's the thickness of the actual steel. So you'll get all that information on the manufacturer's website, and you select the product you want to use, and then you come and look for it in here, okay? Now, when you find the product that you want to use, you can click over here, and it will give you the drawing number, okay? On your working drawings, you're going to say, roof cladding, 2B, ColourBond Custom Orb, fixed in accordance with, deemed to comply manual, and you can write it D-T-C manual, number M/312/01. What does that mean? What does it mean to the builder? To the builder, it means he needs to reference this set of drawings. And they guarantee most builders, oh, that open for me. The builder can go and look up this particular drawing that I'm trying to open. There we go. And so what this is saying, it's saying for Custom Orb, you need to fix every second ridge. See the little screw fixing there? It's showing him where the fixings need to be, that the fixings need to be in the crest, what are his different span types are. Zoom in on that a little bit. So for the single span, the end span, the internal span, how much overhang he can have on the span. All these span tables are there. Quite structural information. The building height up to 5 meters has different spans to the buildings up to 10 meters. It's signed off by the Building Advisory Committee, and it's all of the information about fixing that cladding in a cyclonic region. When you put that on your drawings, the roof cladding ColourBond Custom Orb fixed in accordance with this drawing number, you don't have to print this drawing, you don't have to include this drawing in your set, but what it is saying from your drawing, it's sending the builder to this drawing, and if he fixes that roof sheeting in any other method, it's the builder that's non-compliant, okay? Because the builder knows this drawing. I guarantee you every builder in Darwin knows how to fix ColourBond Custom Orb because it's all over the place. So this is how they do it. And there is a sheet, a similar sheet for most other wall and roof cladding that we use in the Northern Territory. Any questions on that? Quite a bit of information and going from one thing to another. But they're all in there. So when you want to look at products used to clad your building, you do look in the deemed to comply manual. I was really pleased recently in the last 2 years to see just how many products have been added in the last couple of years to this manual. It used to be like you had a choice of about 10 different products, but we seem to have gotten a lot more manufacturers interested in putting them in. So these are all metal roof claddings. If I go back again to, let's have a look at the wall claddings. Again, I'll just go to current. So wall claddings, you can see we've got the fibre cement here. So remembering if you're using any other lightweight cladding, not just metal claddings, if you're using fibre cement sheetings, again, how they're fixed into the battening system behind is really critically important in the event of a cyclone. And so again, they all have deemed to comply numbers. So we've got lots of fibre cement. James Hardy, do you remember the James Hardy presentation we had for materials back at the beginning of the year? All of those products. Now, he would have talked about lots of products that day. I would say about half of what he spoke about are actually in the deemed to comply manual that we can use here. So he definitely showed us this one, the matrix cladding. I think he showed us that one as well. Axon. Lots and lots of the James Hardy. Do you know what I do when I was working, I suppose, and I would get the lovely, we tend to do it all digitally now, but we used to get these lovely printouts of brochures from all the product manufacturers. So you have a library in your office. I used to go through and write the deemed to comply numbers at the top of the page of each of the products. So then when I wanted to use that product, I had my quick reference to my deemed to comply manual. It's always good to check that it's still current in the manual itself, but it's, most of them do stay current. Yes, in a cyclonic area. Remembering that cyclonic area is to Adelaide River. So when you go inland beyond that, you can start using all of the other products. If you're working down in Alice Springs or Tennant Creek or Catherine even, this doesn't apply, but in Darwin it most definitely does apply. So I'm assuming most of you are going to be working in Darwin. So lots and lots of wall cladding there. Soffit linings. So in Queensland, I'll show you later. I'll show you. Well, it's actually in the front of this. It's too small to show you guys here. When we go through this, I'll show you the map of Australia and where all the cyclonic regions are. So Queensland, you don't need to use the deemed to comply manual at all. What you'll be putting on your drawings is fixed in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions. So when you're doing working drawings, it depends how much drawing you're going to do, okay? So you can say to the builder, you need to reference what the manufacturer is saying to do. So whoever built this, and like James Hardy will have their own manuals showing how to fix their Hardy products. Or you can actually look it up yourself and draw detail on your working drawings and write out all of the James Hardy information on how it's to be fixed. Okay? So when we get into working drawings, we're actually remembering, we're telling the builder how to build. Do we want to leave that up to the builder, or do we want to put it on the drawing? So my recommendation is always work it out yourself and put it on the drawing. How do we work it out in other jurisdictions? We work it out from the manufacturer's brochures. But just be careful of manufacturer's brochures when you're using them in Darwin, because they tend to look at, obviously, the majority of the country and what they do in Sydney and Melbourne and Brisbane, where there's no cyclonic areas. And so when you're following the instructions in a brochure, always be conscious that they're not written for cyclonic areas. Okay? This is.
But do WA and Queensland that have their cyclonic
Yes.
find that they've got
I think they use this. They don't have their own. I think they use using ours. Yeah. They don't have their own. Like the other thing you can do, it's a very expensive way to do it. Like I said, if you've got a product that's not in this, is you get a structural engineer who's willing to sign his certificate to say that it's built in, to requirements of cyclonic areas. But how does that structural engineer do that? All of these products have been through a wind tunnel test. That's how they've done it. That's how the engineers are safe when they sign off to say that it's suitable, because they've done the testing. I don't know how, and usually it's the product manufacturers that do pay for the testing.
because they want to sell their product.
They want to sell their product in that area.
They get
Yes.
everything done and then
Yes. Yep.
they obviously purposely do that to be part of the manual. So
Yes.
you have their product listed on the
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Now remember that, I don't know what percentage of the population of Australia lives in cyclonic areas, but it's pretty low, so manufacturers need to know they're going to sell a decent amount of this product to even warrant them doing the testing in the first place. So we do get a little bit disadvantaged by that, but we do live in the cyclonic area. And Darwin, remembering that Darwin and the Northern Territory, because of the effects of Cyclone Tracy, like all of these things came into play, are the very strenuous structural requirements of the NT building regulations came into effect after Cyclone Tracy so that it could never destroy the city like it did that time. That didn't happen in Queensland and WA. It really affected the Northern Territory because it happened to us. So, you know, we are more stringent. However, I dare say that, you know, given that Queensland have been very badly affected by cyclones over the last decade and WA, that WA tends to be a bit different because it's such a remote part of WA that gets affected. They tend not to have a huge focus on it. But I dare say that Queensland will be trying to pick up their game as well. Especially wasn't it Cyclone Larry that did huge amounts of destruction to buildings. So they don't tend to build in Queensland as strictly as we do. We're definitely by far the city that's best prepared for high wind events. Okay, deemed to comply manual. What else is in it? So roller doors. Roller doors are notorious for just blowing away in a cyclone. If you think about what they are, they're just a lightweight metal that tends to be able to be rolled up and down. But we do our roller doors quite differently in high wind areas. We have clip locks all the way down the sides of the door, so when the doors actually close, it's actually locked into position. In other jurisdictions, it tends to only be held at the top and the bottom. So that if you actually push on a roller door anywhere else, it'll give a bit of a wobble. But in the Territory, that shouldn't really be happening. There should be lots of clips down the side. So when you're specifying roller doors, and we do have roller doors in our Class 1 building, yeah, we've got a domestic roller door, and we need to be looking in the deemed to comply manual. So I want to see the note on your drawing saying roller door from whatever manufacturer, and its deemed to comply number and how it should be fitted. Solar hot water system, same. So if you've got a solar hot water system on your buildings, what you do, you need to be coming in here and looking for a product that you're going to specify. Okay, we don't leave the builder to choose what products, we're going to specify them ourselves. Fences, again, lots and lots of fences on your site plan. You've got fences that are there. I think something has been specified. Good neighbour fencing, something like that. Region C, full shielding. Because remember, a solid fence gets a lot of force in a wind event. And, you know, it doesn't have, it's not like a building, it doesn't have a square rectangle shape to be able to brace itself. So a fence tends to, you know, be collateral damage quite quickly and blow away. And again, the panels themselves can do more further damage to other buildings and people. So we want to make sure they're fixed in accordance. So picking your fence from this list as well.
Sorry, is it for any fence or is it just for a solid fence?
Solid fences, yes. The chain wire mesh fence is fine. But if you build a blockwork wall, you need to have that Section 40 by a structural engineer for that. Yeah. Yes. Yes. So, yeah. And I think because that blockwork wall, again, has a force on it.
But I'm guessing that wouldn't be too much of a risk for a certified to sign off on because it's used quite a bit.
The certifier won't sign off on it himself unless he's a structural engineer. You'll have to get a structural engineer to sign the Section 40 for the blockwork wall. They'll do the whole calculation. Yeah, for every single wall. I built one at my house and they did the whole calculation. And obviously, if you put some slats in the wall, you know, some openings in the wall, you know, a lot of people did build the piers and then put the pool fencing in between. A lot less lateral force on that. So, you know, the engineer can then, so the engineer will be the person who sized the footings. So you want the engineer to have less load on the footings because else he's going to make you build massive footings, which he did at my house. And I worked for him at the time. And cost us a fortune in footings just for a blockwork wall. Because this is the problem. Because a blockwork wall wants to do that, so the footing almost has to be L-shaped to prevent that bending motion happening. I forget, we had like, I don't know, it was, I think we went down 900. Yeah, it was pretty deep. And it was just a whole strip footing filled up with concrete. And I think we were about 400 wide. And then all the reinforcing bars going up, yeah. 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 So everything in the Northern Territory has to either be in the Deemed to Comply manual or have a Section 40 from a structural engineer. Okay? All of our structures, including fences and walls. Anything that can collapse, cause damage, blow away. Alrighty. Shall we do a 10-minute break and then we'll come back to, well, I think you can all have a play around with the Deemed to Comply manual there as well and have a look at it yourselves. And then when we come back, we'll have a look at the Building Practitioners Board and the registration of our professionals. So the next board I wanted to have a look at is called the Building Practitioners Board. It's on your list there. So the Building Practitioners Board is another statutory body under the Building Act and is responsible for the registration of building practitioners. So when we talk about building practitioners, we don't just mean builders, we mean people in the construction building industry. Establishing and maintaining a system of performance reporting to ensure that the information on practitioners' past performance is available and can be taken into account when assessing their competence. Monitoring practitioners' compliance with registration requirements, monitoring practitioners' competence and professional conduct, and conducting inquiries into practitioners' work and conduct, if necessary, disciplining them. Developing and publishing codes of practice for reference by building practitioners for the use of the board and the director in assessing practitioners' work and conduct. So, yeah, obviously there's an application lodgement to get yourself onto the registration. If you intend to carry out the following residential building work in the Northern Territory, you must be registered with the Building Practitioners Board as a building contractor. So, building contractors, new single houses, townhouses, duplexes, new residential units to any height, verandas, garages, carports, extensions to living areas, bedrooms, any sort of extensions, retaining walls, and anywhere where the cost is above 12,000. And we'll have a look at the Register of Building Practitioners. Can anyone see the blatant categories that are left out of that? Commercial buildings. So you can build a school or a hospital or this building or, you know, high-rise apartment buildings without being a registered building practitioner in the Northern Territory. Currently, there are some changes afoot, I believe, on that. So let's have a look at the registration of building practitioners. Again, it looks very like the Deemed to Comply manual, and you can have a category in here. So you can have, and this one, so remember I said it's not just about builders. So these are the current professions that need to be registered under the Northern Territory Building Act. So we've got the building certifier, residential and unrestricted. We've got the building contractor, who's the builder himself, restricted and unrestricted, certifying architect, certifying engineer hydraulic, meaning plumbing, water, certifying engineer mechanical, so air conditioning systems, certifying engineer structural, for all of your structural elements, we spoke a lot about that before, certifying plumber and drainer, and certifying plumber and drainer for design only. So, we talked earlier about the Section 40s, okay? The people who give you a Section 40 are any of these certifying engineers. So you may have a Section 40 for your hydraulics design, and then you might have a Section 40 for your hydraulics construction. Certifying engineer for mechanical, generally talking about if you've designed a cooling system, predominantly in Darwin, with a lot of duct work, a lot of chillers and the like, and a complex system, that would have to be certified by the mechanical engineer. The reason for this, for these guys, because these are all professions in their own right, the reason for these three to provide a certificate, a Section 40 certificate, to the building certifier is because one person can't be over all of these things. It's just too wide when we get up to commercial buildings. It's just too much information for one certifier to be on top of, you know, mechanical design and structural design and hydraulics design and all the architectural elements. But however, you will find that quite often for residential only, you will have the certifier who has enough structural knowledge to be able to do all the structural inspections himself just for the dwelling, and you won't need to have all the rest of these people. For a dwelling, you generally will just have your building certifier. You'll have someone who will produce the drawings, like yourselves, or a building designer or an architect, and then you'll engage a building certifier and perhaps a structural engineer, but more likely a building certifier who's got the structural experience, and a contractor. And those will be the three people you'll need for a dwelling house. When we get into the bigger projects, you can see that this starts to constitute the design team. These are all the people who will be needed for a bigger project. David?
And they approve it at the end of construction, like at that set system, or let's say the hydraulics?
No, 2 stages. So we have 2 stages with certification. We've got building permits. So you have to apply for the permit before anything is constructed. So your Section 40 from any of these engineers will be a Section 40 for design. So basically, based on the drawings, there's a Section 40 saying that this design is compliant with the National Construction Code on paper. And then at the end, there will be inspections during construction. And then at the end of construction, all of those people who've done inspections, been to site, will provide their Section 40 for construction back to the certifier. Whoever is project managing, will apply for an occupancy permit at the end. And then once you've got all the documentation in place, and the certifiers obviously have done his mandatory inspections during construction too, if everybody's happy and ready to sign off, an occupancy permit will be issued. But the Section 40 is a Section 40 for design, and then a Section 40 certificate for construction as well.
How long does Section 40 last for? Like, say, this year for people applying for
The Section 40 generally covers a body of work rather than a period of time. Yeah. So I've certainly seen where a project might have an occupancy permit for a long time, like there was a building permit issued and it was constructed, and for whatever reason the certifier left town, or, you know, nobody gave them the documentation. The building permit has a 2-year life period. You're supposed to build within the 2 years. But I've certainly seen cases where the Section 40 and the site inspections were done during the construction period, and that Section 40 has then been used later on to get the occupancy permit for the building. Yeah. Quite a while later. There's that moratorium that we spoke about earlier this morning. I'm not sure if you're here. The building moratorium, where it's exactly for instances like that, where buildings have been left without proper documentation for a long number of years, and the moratorium is helping people get the documentation together, helping people with inspections. So the worst thing that can happen to you is that you build a building and you don't get any inspections during the construction period, because who's going to sign off on that building? You know, it's very, like, can you imagine the stress that you're putting on a structural engineer to ask him for a Section 40 for construction for a building that he didn't see. He didn't see when they had set up all the reinforcing in the ground before they poured the concrete. He needs to go out there that day and look at all that, look at it all laid out, and then the concrete is poured on top of it. How does he come back and retrospectively do that? You know, this is a huge problem. So if you're ever in that position where you're looking after projects, project managing, inspections during construction are absolutely essential, and no client should proceed without them. You will not be the winner in that. You know, people think they're saving money by not getting inspections done. Bad mistake. Basically, you can have a building that will never, ever be able to have an occupancy permit, especially if there's any doubt over how it was actually constructed. And, you know, what do you do if the slab was poured incorrectly with not enough reinforcing in it? Like, be realistic. What can you do? The whole building's built on that slab. You know, it's not constructed correctly. So there was a funny story. There was quite a few years ago in Darwin, when Darwin was more of a you know, outback town. There was builders going around and they would set up all the reinforcing and they would have the building certifier come out and inspect it and tick it off. And then the minute the building certifier left the site, they would take out all the reinforcing and pour the concrete and bring them for reinforcing to the next site. So they thought they were being very clever. And they were saving lots of money by not putting in as much reinforcing as they should into sites and getting their inspections done and taking it out. But who were they fooling? Just the client, just the person who was paying for the building. And, you know, the concrete will crack and will fail and eventually everybody finds out what's going on. But, you know, this is why I'm really opposed to people trying to get around the system. Just use the system. The system is there for a reason. It's there for a good reason, to protect you and to protect the building and all the users of the building as well. So, work with the system. All right, let's have a look.
Did it happen? Like, did they get caught?
Yeah, I think so. And I don't even know the retribution, but I just heard that this was a practice that was going on. Yeah. But there was definitely concrete slabs that cracked, big time, because of lack of reinforcing. All right, building certifier residential. Active, let's have a search. So, as you can see, there's not a whole lot of residential building certifiers in town. These are the ones that are restricted. I should find if I can find a definition of what restricted is. Here we go. So, building certifier residential may issue building permits and occupancy permits for Class 1 and 10 building structures in accordance with the requirements of the Building Act. So they cannot issue building permits or occupancy permits for anything other than Class 1 or Class 10. Building certifier unrestricted. A building certifier unrestricted may issue building permits and occupancy permits for all classes of buildings or structures. And then we've got the two categories of actual building contractors. So the building contractor residential restricted is again Class A's and Class 10s, retaining wall. The value of the work has to be, in order to trigger a building permit, the value of the work you're doing needs to be greater than 12,000, okay? So this is, I suppose, an exemption from getting a building permit is a very small project that costs less than that. And the building contractor residential unrestricted, he can issue permits for, the building contractor residential unrestricted, this is the contractor, not the certifier, he can build buildings Class 2 of any height, Class 1, Class 10. As you can tell, we don't have any category for a contractor for classes 3 to 9. It's just not mentioned in there at all. We've got the certifying engineers, mechanical, and so they may certify the design and or construction of mechanical systems. So the hydraulic engineer can certify the design or construction of plumbing and drainage works, some hydraulic fire services, so you know where you've got wet risers in a tall building where you have a fire sprinkler system, you've got water going through that fire sprinkler system, so that's what that's referring to. The certifying plumber and drainer may design and or construct the plumbing and drainage works in all classes of buildings. And plumber and drainer design may certify the design of plumbing and drainage work. So this guy can only do the design, section 40. Okay, so for most dwelling houses, do we have a hydraulics engineer? No. Who do we have? Plumber. Yep. So before you get the building permit, you've got to get your plumber engaged, and you've got to get him, and it's often, like I've seen drawings that the plumber has just drawn the plumbing, the bare minimum of the plumbing layout over the normal floor plan in your working drawing set. So plumbers generally aren't draftspeople, or they don't hire draftspeople, and they will just often hand draw it, and that is sufficient. Then they'll stamp that drawing, and that's the plumbing design. Once the plumbing is fitted, they don't need to do an as-built drawing. All they need to do is provide the section 40 for construction to say that it's been built in accordance with that original drawing. And again, the drawings get stamped by all these different people. Okay? Let's have a look at who's who. So certifier residential, we just looked at. Certifier, oh no, it's not the right page. The certifier unrestricted, there's quite a few more of them. So you'll often find that, for instance, we've got Irwin Consult, which is a company I used to work with, and within Irwin Consult, Shane Cooper is one of their certifiers. So you get, like, basically, Shane is registered on his own, but he also works for a company. So the companies or the people themselves can be certified. So we've got quite a few going on. I'm not sure how many's on that list, but possibly 40 or 50. Some of them Dean also works for Irwin Consult. So some of them are more active than others, for instance. Got some of them down in Noosa Heads. He's not going to be very good at doing inspections for you. Port Melbourne, Surfers Paradise. Some of these have definitely moved out of Darwin. Brisbane, Adelaide. So a lot of these guys are just keeping the registration going. Wow, there's loads of them outside Darwin. But Grant O'Callaghan's quite a well-known Darwin certifier. So yeah, try and pick one that's within the Darwin area. Definitely going to be more suitable to do inspections for you than someone who's interstate. Alrighty. So when you want to find a builder, when your client comes to you and says, "I've found a builder," one of the first places you want to check is on here to make sure that he's actually a registered builder. The form for building permit, you must name the builder on the form for the building permit, okay? You can't just get a building permit for a building and then go and get like quotes off lots of different builders. You have to actually engage and have a contract with the builder before that. And the builder for a residential project must be on this list. Okay, so lots of people on there. The builders list is quite way more extensive. Again, some of them are active, some of them are not. Some of them trying to hold on to their registration, even though they're retired. So when I first came to Darwin, I can't remember what year this was, maybe around 2005. This list didn't exist around then, okay? There was no list of registered builders. And there was a period where if you had experience as a builder, you could get your builder's license, as they call it, given to you. It's a bit like, you know, back in the day when everybody used to drive cars without driver's licenses, and then all of a sudden everybody just obtained to drive without doing a test or without having any minimum qualifications. You just got your driver's license. Well, this happened to builders in Darwin. So a lot of the builders from that time and from before that time will have got their builder's licenses without formal qualifications. Nowadays, you have to do the Certificate 4 in construction, building and construction. Not only do you have to do your Certificate 4, but you also have to have relevant experience in building the types of buildings that you're applying to be registered for. Okay, so you have to have, I think it's a minimum of 2 years experience. You have to have worked for another builder and have them sign off on your work experience. So it's quite more onerous now to get onto this list, but the list is fairly extensive because of the handout of licenses that happened when it was first created. Okay. Have a look. So that's, and then the building contractor unrestricted is more to do with builders who build high-rise apartment buildings, because that's the difference between these two lists. Certifying architects, this is an interesting list. There are none. Why is that? I only realised this really recently, that none of the architects are registered. Well, to be honest, they're registered with the Architects Institute. And there's no real reason why you need to be a certifying architect in Darwin. Like what piece of paper are you going to sign as a certifying architect? Because the architect doesn't sign off on any part of the building. Okay? The structural engineer signs off on the structure element of the building, and the building certifier signs off on all of the rest of the everyday part of the building, but there's no form for the architect to sign. So my understanding is, and this is from an architect, is that there's no reason for them to go and get registered. What's the advantage for it? They're already practicing as an architect, and they have their own Architects Act, but there's no, in this process, there's no real forms for the architect to need to be registered to sign. This may change in the coming years, but at the moment, there's none in there. If we look at structural engineers, very popular profession in Darwin, and there's quite a few in there. So again, structural engineer will sign off on the design and the construction. So I want to talk to you about structural design. This is an architectural drafting course. For most projects, to keep costs low for housing, single dwelling housing for class 1 buildings, most drafts people will draw not only the architectural but also the structural drawings, okay? So there are two different sets of drawings. This one looks at all of the elements of the house, the finishes, the materials, the planning application, all of this architectural. Structural just looks at the slab and the roof truss and the blockwork in the walls and the reinforcing that goes into that. This set of drawings is just going to show those structural elements. Often we find for class 1 buildings that those two sets are kind of merged. They try and show everything on the one set of drawings, okay? And then that set of drawings will be stamped by a structural engineer to say there's enough detail on there to warrant me to issue a section 40 for design. On this course, I'm trying very not to merge those two. So when you're doing your working drawings, when it comes to things like slab thickness, even though you'll have shown a slab on your architecturals, I just want you to add a note to say, see structural engineer's drawings. Okay? But just know that in the real world, you may be expected to draw some of the structural elements. If you are doing that, you should be doing it under the direction of a structural engineer who will tell you what to draw and what notes to add to the drawings. But as experienced and as long in the game as you may become over the years, do not try and design structural elements of the building as a building designer or a draftsperson. That is a structural engineer's job to do. You may do a bit of structural drafting for them under their instruction, but don't ever start writing on drawings 200 millimeter high slab. Okay? Even if you've drawn the slab at 200 millimeter high slab, the second you write that, you're given an instruction to the builder. So how did you know it was a 200 millimeter high slab? You don't, because you didn't design it. And you don't know what forces are on it, and you haven't done the calculations that a structural engineer would do to do that, okay? So as much as people may request you to do structural drawings or want you to add those details, only add them from a markup from a structural engineer. Don't add them on your own accord, because when you add them on your own accord, you're giving that instruction. And if somebody goes and builds that like that under your instruction, and, you know, the search part comes back and says, you know, who did the structural design? And, you know, the client goes, oh, Seven wrote that on the drawing, you know. You're not a structural engineer, and don't take responsibility for the structural elements of a building, okay? Especially sizes, anything with dimensions, you know. Starting to size roof timbers or anything like that, purlin sizes. Only write them if they've been given to you by the engineer, okay? All other times I want to see the notes saying truss to engineers, structural engineers design, slab to structural engineers design. Okay? Don't draw them, don't write dimensions. Don't draw reinforcement in unless it's been given to you as a markup. And the structural engineer has taken responsibility for it. Yeah, that's really all I need to go in here. You can have a browse around in there yourself. I suppose the other news that I'll talk to you about before we break for lunch is that as part of my work on the Building Advisory Committee, there is a lot of talk about adding more professions to this list, and building designer draftsperson is one of those professions that has registration in other states and territories. You must have a qualification and you must be registered to practice as a draftsperson in the Northern Territory currently. Any of you guys can call yourselves building designers, draftspersons, whatever you want right now, and go out and work without ever doing this course or anything else. And there's no problem, and there's nothing stopping you doing that. David? Of course you can. What's stopping you? Nothing. So that is about to change. So in other states and territories, you cannot do that. In Victoria, at the moment, to call yourself a building designer, I think you have to have done an associate degree in, I'm not sure what it's in, something architectural, something or other. I don't know what the title is, but I'm hoping that when we do get registration here in the territory, that the Cert 4 in building design drafting will be the qualification level for you to be a building designer draftsperson. But that's all going to be discussed. There's a public document out at the minute called Building Confidence Report. It's a national document, and it talks a lot about the registration of different building professionals especially what the approach they're going to take to it is that anyone who needs to provide a piece of paper to a certifier, so anything the certifier relies on, then that person giving the certifier that has to be a registered person. That makes sense? Because at the moment, for instance, you can be an energy rater or energy efficiency consultant, and you can do the 5-star energy ratings for housing. You can do that. You can do, I think you need to have a Cert 4 in energy assessment for that. But before you didn't. And anyone could have done it, and what happened was a lot of people were doing them in their back bedroom on a computer, were doing these energy ratings. They had no connection with the building industry. They just knew how to use the software, and they were producing these certificates, and the builders were going to these people who were producing certificates for $200 and handing them to the building certifier, and the certifier does not know who that person is. They don't know what their qualification is, but he's relying on that energy rating to say that that building is designed in accordance with the NCC for energy ratings. Do you understand what I mean? So we have to be, the industry has to get much more tight around that. Who is producing this certificate? Not enough that you produce the certificate, but who is the person behind that and what qualifications do they have? And has it been done in accordance with the NCC is the real question, you know. I know from doing energy ratings myself that some of the energy ratings that were coming out were way in excess of what they should have been. But it was a money game. People were making money out of producing certificates, and they didn't care. They didn't need to be registered, so they were not held accountable. So really what that's going to be is this list will be extended, and hopefully one day your name will be on that list as a building designer stroke draft person in the NT. That's the aim of the game for us all, isn't it? And believe you me, it's much better to be in a profession that's a registered profession than a non-registered profession, because the problem is you've come here and you've spent a year here and you've done all the learning and you've done all the assessment, and then you're trying to compete in the market with someone who hasn't done all of that and who may be producing sets of drawings that are really substandard and they're missing half the things that need to be on them. But they don't care. The client doesn't know any difference because they're uneducated in terms of drafting and what should be, a set of drawings should be. And you're trying to compete in the market against that. You know, when the client comes to you for a quote and comes to somebody else who isn't qualified for a quote, that quote can be very unfavourable towards the qualified person, the person who actually knows how much work needs to go into this. And that's what we have. That's what we find in lots of different markets all over the, in every industry, I think. But in particular, we have to protect ourselves, and the best way to be protected is to have a minimum qualification level and to be on a registered list. Okay? You'll find that all the draft people in the marketplace will be all scrambling to get drafting qualifications, and you guys will already have yours nice and up to date.
When is this going to happen?
It's a 4-year period. The idea that this confidence in building implication plan is given a 4-year national 4-year timeline to roll it out.
But then I would say
that's the longest.
yeah, this is what's going to happen, and then you've got a period of time for all the people who don't have the required qualifications to get one. I would say
Yeah.
a little bit of a
There'll probably be again, like the builder's license was, there'll probably be, if you've been working in the industry for like 10 years or something like that, you probably automatically get added to the list, maybe something like that. But you'll find people who were sort of on the fringes of the industry or doing a little bit from home and never really had any work experience in a larger office or anything like that. They'll be the people who'll get caught and need to get a qualification, formal qualification. Most people who do drafting, to be honest, have some sort of a qualification, because it's not the kind of thing you wake up in the morning and say, I'm just going to, start drawing a set of drawings for clients, because unless somebody's just trained you or had you working beside them. But, there's a lot to learn, as you guys know. You're near the end of your year, and there's a lot to take in drafting and to need to know about. So, yeah. Okay. So that's the registers list. That's really everything I have to look at there. See how we're going for time. Okay, I'm going to have a look at this. So let's look at the National Construction Code itself then. This is a PowerPoint that's actually produced by the NCC itself, and it really just talks about how the NCC works. Again, I'm referring to this book. You have it in PDF. It's freely downloadable. So you used to have to buy these books every year. The NCC used to be republished every single year, and every office would have to I think it was $300 and something every year to buy the National Construction Code. About 4 or 5 years ago, it became free, downloadable off the internet, actually hardly anyone. This is 2014. The most recent version is 2016. Again, it used to be an annual update, and they changed that in 2016 to be every 3 years. So we're due a new release of NCC in 1st of May 2019, which is 3 weeks away. Okay? So while we're still looking at 2016 for this unit, because it just, well, I don't think there's a huge amount of changes between 16 and 19 that will actually really affect us, but I do have a summary of the changes which I'll give you later on in the unit that we can look at. The ABCB website is let me show it to you, is your go-to place for all things NCC. So Australian Building Codes Board is the ABCB, and that's what it looks like, their website. They've got the actual NCC suite, is what they call it. And so you've got it, there's a preview actually out at the moment for the 1st of May 2019. It's about to be released, and of course we've always got the, this is the whole series. So in this series there's 3 documents. There's Volume 1, Volume 2, Volume 3, and a guide to Volume 1. So Volume 2, sounds a little bit backwards, Volume 2 is your dwelling houses, okay? Volume 1 is all your commercial buildings. Okay, so residential, Volume 2, commercial buildings, Volume 1. So got a Volume 1 preview, a guide to Volume 1. I actually really advise you guys to read the guides. The guides are actually way easier to understand than the NCC itself. The NCC itself is a reference document for those in the know, whereas the guide is a bit of an explanatory document. So if you want to, feel free to download, read the guides. So it's NCC 2019. Guide to Volume 1 preview. So these are all previews because it obviously hasn't been completely released yet. That should change in the next few weeks. And so then you've got the NCC 2016 Complete Series, including Amendment 1. That's the one that you need to download and have to use, okay? NCC 2016 is the one we're going to be using for this unit. So Volume 3 is, I wrote 3 then. Volume 3 is plumbing. We don't look at Volume 3 at all. Plumbers do, okay? And that's why they sign those lovely Section 40s first, because they're looking after all that side of the NCC compliance, and they're going to give us a lovely certificate to say that our building is compliant with Volume 3, and we don't have to look at it at all, which is nice for us. And then it goes back. You can go back very, very, very far. This is all still 2016, Volume 3. And you can keep going. I'm sure it goes back to the 2014, 15 versions, Complete Series. You can go back as far as you like. Okay? So they've obviously been superseded and archived, but you can still download copies of the older ones if you want. Now, every year there's minor enough changes. Some years there's fairly major changes to certain parts of the NCC, but actually there's not too much happening in the 2019 version. But this is the first time in the history of the NCC that there's been a 3-year gap between versions. We've been using 2016 during 2017-18, and now we're going to upgrade to 2019, and there won't be another release then again until 2021. Alrighty. So there are lots and lots of different information on this website. I suggest that you do have a good look around. And I'm going to go through a PowerPoint with you now, which kind of explains how it works. All right, what practitioners need to know. And so we're just looking, as I said, at volumes 1 and 2. So the table of contents in the NCC just looks at the building regulations themselves. It looks at the NCC as a performance-based code, and we'll go into that a little bit more in a bit. The application of NCC, the classifications of the buildings themselves, the NCC compliance structure, defined terms, volume 1, compliance, and more about the ABC. So, why does Australia have building regulations? Let's look at these questions first. What is the National Construction Code, NCC? Is the NCC part of the law, and do I have to comply with it? Who produces the NCC? So it's there primarily to protect people and the environment. People as in the clients, but also people as in the building users. You're protected in this building right now because of the NCC regulations that were applied to it when it was built. In other words, when you go down the stairs, every single step of that stairs is the same. You don't get a really high one halfway down in the middle that you have to navigate and it's going to trip you up every time. That's because of the NCC. Okay? It's there to protect everyone. The NCC comprises the BCA, volumes 1 and 2, and the PCA, which is the plumbing construction. What's the CA again? So yes, each state and territory adopts the NCC into its own legislation. How did we do that in the Northern Territory? Our Building Act and our building regulations that we looked at this morning, they reference the NCC. So in there it tells us that we have to comply with the NCC. And who looks after it is the Australian Building Codes Board, which is the ABCB. This is their symbol up here, and they're the people who update it and monitor it and consolidate all the feedback they get from all the building practitioners before any new release. Okay, NCC, a performance-based code. Can you think of a time when you wanted to build something differently to the standard practice? What is a performance solution? Why would I want to include a performance solution in a building design? So, this isn't explained very well, but let me go back just to this diagram. In the NCC, what the NCC does is it sets a performance requirement, okay? It says, this is the requirement, this is the standard that your stairs needs to be at. Let's take that as an example. It sets out in the document to provide 2 compliance solutions. One is known as a deemed to satisfy solution, not to be confused with the deemed to comply manual that we looked at this morning. This is something completely different. Deemed to comply solution or a performance solution. What that means is deemed to comply means that if you follow the method in the NCC exactly as it is in the NCC, then it is deemed to comply. It means it complies with the NCC. If you want to go down the road of a performance solution, you want to design something that's outside of what's prescribed in the NCC, you can have, it's flexible enough, the NCC is flexible enough to allow you to do that in terms of providing a performance solution. But the onus is on you or your engineer or somebody in your design team to prove that your solution is equal to or better than the deemed to comply solution that the NCC prescribes. Any questions on that? 2 different compliance methods in the NCC. So the NCC is a performance-based code containing all performance requirements for the construction of buildings. It is built around a hierarchy of guidance and code compliance levels, with the performance requirements being the minimum level that buildings, building elements, plumbing and drainage needs must meet. A building, plumbing or drainage solution will comply with NCC if it satisfies the performance requirements, which are mandatory requirements of the NCC. The performance requirements are also supported by general requirements which cover other aspects of applying the NCC, including its interpretation, reference documents, and acceptance of design and construction. hold on, let's go down here. Performance solution. A performance solution is unique for each individual situation. These solutions are often flexible in achieving the outcomes and encouraging innovative design and technology in use. So, what happened in Australia? Other construction codes I've worked with are very prescriptive. They tell you how to do it. And every building in the country, this is quite like the Irish and British way of doing it, every building does that exactly the same way, okay? In Australia, they wanted the NCC to be a lot more flexible to allow for innovative design. And so you are allowed to do performance solutions within the NCC. That's really all you need to take from this, okay? I don't want to make this too complex that it confuses everyone. A performance solution directly addresses the performance requirements by using one or more of the assessments and methods available in the NCC. Deemed to satisfy solution. A DTS, which is often abbreviated as DTS solution, follows a set recipe of what, when and how to do something. It uses DTS solutions from the NCC, which include materials, components, design factors, construction methods. If used, they're deemed to meet the performance requirements. So, simple way to do it. If you don't want to design something new, follow exactly the prescribed method of the NCC. If you want to be innovative and use different designs, you're going to use a performance solution. What's the disadvantage of performance solutions, do you think? Big disadvantage is nobody told you how to do it. You have to make it up yourself. You have to design it. You have to find a way of solution. So I'll explain one really good example that I know. Energy assessments in the NCC, okay? There are, when we look at energy assessment of a house, and we've looked at this earlier this year, we have to look at the R values of the wall and the roof. And we have to look at the glazing and do a glazing calculator, calculate how much glass we have, and what orientation it's facing and all of that. Then we have to look at building ceiling and whether or not we've got draft proof on the bottom of our doors, external doors. We have to think about our natural ventilation and how our fans are and how our air is flowing through the building. So that's all following the deemed to comply solution that's given in the NCC. It sets out limits for each of those things individually. A performance solution for energy efficiency is to go to an energy assessor who knows how to use software, and they build an energy model of that house in the software, and they produce a 5-star or a 6-star rating for the house. That is a performance solution, because the software that the energy assessor is using is deemed or is seen as a performance solution. It's already been verified that getting 5 stars is equal to the deemed to satisfy solution. If you follow everything and do your walls and your roof and your everything like this in the NCC, and you tick off every single box, that is equal to a 5-star rating in a performance solution. Any questions on that? Performance solutions can come in all shapes and sizes, but in my experience, they are generally a more expensive way to prove your compliance with the NCC than following the deemed to satisfy option. Okay? When we read the NCC and it tells us exactly what is required, they are generally deemed to satisfy solutions. The NCC doesn't give us performance solutions. That's up to the designer to come up with those on their own, or a software manufacturer who wants to manufacture software that will say, if you do all of this and I spit you out a star rating, that nobody really knows what 5-star means, but the background of the software has been verified to say that that's equal to the deemed to satisfy solution. Any questions on that? Just need to know that there are 2 methods of compliance with the NCC. So, answer is it complies with the performance requirements but not using the deemed to satisfy provisions. Multiple reasons. Well, I suppose there could be cost savings. That is another reason people would do it if they don't want to use the deemed to satisfy provision. Constructability is often a reason that the builder or client may find an easier, better, quicker you know, way to construct a building by not using the deemed to satisfy solution provided in the NCC, or an innovative approach. Somebody's just come up with something new. So the application of the NCC. What types of building work need to comply with the NCC? There are state and territory regulations, council regulations, the NCC, Australian standards and other rules. How do they all fit together? The NCC applies to new construction, additions and alterations, changes of use to a building. So I suppose this used to happen to me when I was doing a lot of energy assessments. Somebody would come along and say, I want to just build an extension to my living room. And I would say to them, oh, if you want me to use the star rating, I have to rate the whole house. So the performance solution using the software to give you an energy rating, star rating, only assesses one building on one lot. And so the energy rating you give is for that whole building. So you can't do an extension. So in that scenario, I would say to my client, you're actually better off using the deemed to satisfy solution, because I can just do the deemed to satisfy and apply it only to the addition and the alteration. I don't need to do the whole existing house. I'm only going to apply the NCC to your actual extension. And so in that scenario, I was better off using the method of compliance, the deemed to comply. Okay? Everybody with me? Anybody not? Anybody want to ask any questions? Where is it? It's actually on the ABCB website. It's their PowerPoint. No, I didn't make this. No, it's ABCB. Actually, I downloaded this quite a while ago. I used it last year as well, but when I went to look at it yesterday, they seem to have done something different with all their teaching resources. So anyway, I just stuck with the one I had last year. So the Australian Constitution states that states and territories have the right to control building work. So this is why we have the Northern Territory Building Act and the Northern Territory Regulations, because it's not ruled by the Australian federal government, it's ruled by each state and territory on what they want to do with their own building work. However, we reference the NCC, which is a national construction code. So we have the states, territories, acts and regulations up here. And then we have the technical reference that it has, which is the NCC and the Australian standards. These are national documents, okay? And so they refer to every scenario all across Australia. But then we also have the administrative side. So we have the lodging applications, the fees, and the scope of documents. This is generally not a national document. It's done by each state and territory on its own, the process of how it's implicated. All right, classifications. What do the building classifications represent? Classifications acknowledge that different buildings have different needs. Different risks, activities conducted, type and number of occupants will determine the different building requirements. And we saw this earlier in the year, you know, we talk about it all the time. We talk about our Class 1 residential dwelling, Class 2 high-rise apartment buildings. You know, all our Class 3 to 9s are commercial buildings. We'll look at the classifications a bit more after lunch. We'll go back over them again. But we have looked at them earlier in the year. Ooh, did I go backwards there? But it really just talks about why the NCC works on the building classification. So certain rules apply to certain classes of buildings. And that's how we apply the NCC itself. The NCC compliance structure. What parts of the NCC are mandatory? Answer, compliance levels, I don't know what that means. Oh, here we go. Ah, yeah. I was like, what? The mandatory parts of the NCC are the performance requirements. So every time you see a performance requirement in the NCC, it's generally written, it's written in a different style of text, and it's actually referenced as a performance requirement. So you'll see this bit in pink here is the appropriate performance requirement, okay? And then it'll be explanatory underneath that of how you need to apply that. So really, what we're saying is the clause is the bit in pink that is the performance requirement. All of the rest of the notes in the NCC are explanatory or telling you how to do it. We've already looked at this. So there's two methods of meeting each performance requirement. You can follow the strict prescriptive instruction in the NCC, or you can come up with your own performance solution. The NCC Volume 2 contains acceptable construction. What does this mean? So remembering Volume 2 is for Class 1 buildings. We don't have acceptable construction in Volume 1 for commercial buildings, but we do in Volume 2. So acceptable construction, whoops, why is that doing that to me? So you can use what's called the Acceptable Construction Manual or Acceptable Construction Practice. It basically means for dwelling houses that if there's an acceptable way that this has always been done in construction, that you can follow that, and those are all described in the construction manual that you can follow. It's just a reference. It's a bit like in Volume 1 we tend to reference Australian standards a lot more, but in Volume 2 we use the Acceptable Construction Manual. We don't use it so much in the NT because we tend to use our Deemed to Comply manual a lot more, because acceptable construction methods that they use down south may not necessarily be acceptable in Northern Territory. So we tend to use our own manual for that. So you're going to reference documents, traditional construction techniques. We just talked about that. I'm going to repeat all that. Define terms. Why does the NCC have some of its text in plain type and some terms are written in italics? Answer. The italics identifies a defined term. Defined term clarify a specific meaning for the purpose of the NCC or a specific part of the NCC. And so we've looked at defined terms before in terms of planning. It just means that the word means something in particular, and there is a whole area of definitions in the NCC that you really should reference. I think in the digital, has anybody got the digital copy of an NCC open? I think in the digital copy you can click on the defined term and it will actually bring it up for you. On the word, yeah, the word that's in italics. I think that is correct. I'm not quite sure. So Volume 1, so we've got lots of different, the 5-step approach that we have to take. And so we want to look at the building classification itself. The rise in stories is going to make a big difference to how we apply the NCC to commercial building. The type of construction, whether it's masonry, lightweight, steel. Fire compartmentation is always a high risk for commercial buildings. We'll come back and talk about that a lot more when we're doing 82 and 3. And step 5 is then the other NCC requirements. So step 1, classification. Determine the classification as per Part A3. So that's just talking about whether it's is it a Class 6 building, is it a Class 5 building. So step 2 is the rise in stories. What is going on? I'm clicking away here and nothing's happening. So it's the rise in stories above ground level. Something to take in mind there, keep in mind. Type of construction. So is it non-combustible, less fire resistant, least fire resistant? So you've got the rise in stories. This is table C1. So you've got your ABC for the different types of construction and your different class buildings over here. It's just one of the tables. We'll come back to that when we're doing commercial buildings. But it just shows that all of these things make a huge difference in terms of how you apply the NCC. Check the maximum fire compartment size in the table. And so you can see for different types of construction, different classifications of buildings. These are the words in italic. So aged care building means something very specific, as does floor area. And then you can see the compartment sizes for all the different types of construction and the number of floors. I don't see the number of floors there anywhere, but and other NCC requirements. So you just need to go through the NCC, all through the sections, provision by provision. And that's the only thing you can do with the NCC to make sure that you don't leave something out. So you document decisions, check state and territory variations and additions. Oh, this is something I should speak about. So, for instance, in this, maybe I'll show you this after lunch. The energy efficiency provisions in Volume 2 have state, so often you will have the performance requirement in the pink, and then here with this sort of maroon colour, you'll have the state and territory provisions, okay? So this is where all states and territories reference this one document, but this one, for instance, says that in the Northern Territory, Part 3.12 is replaced with BCA 2009, Part 3.12. So in other words, in the Northern Territory for energy efficiency, we're not up to 2014, we're definitely not up to 2016, we're definitely not up to 2019, we're still using the energy efficiency provisions that were prescribed in 2009. That's what we have to comply with. So you do, when you read at the very first part of each of the provisions, you need to read the provision itself, and then you need to read the state and territory versions of that to see, you know, sometimes the Northern Territory is actually exempt from some of the provisions. And for instance, for termite management, because we've got those Darwinites, or whatever they're called, those termites up here, our provisions are actually more stringent than the rest of the country. So it allows each state and territory to make their own little provisions in the NCC. Adjustments to the provisions, should I say. All right, so these are the steps for the office building. I might come back to these slides again when we're doing the assessment task 2, but that's just talking about how you determine all those types of constructions. Okay, so if I want to incorporate a performance solution into a design, can I do it myself, or do I need a specialist practitioner? Practitioners need to understand what the NCC requires and why. For specific subjects, generally a specialist is expected. So it's kind of like doing the energy rating. If you kind of, you know, download the software and do your own 5-star energy rating, nobody's really going to trust that certificate. You kind of do need to engage other consultants. The scope of the documentation provided to the certifying authority needs to be considered. So what are you actually going to provide to show how you have justified your performance solution? And that's the end of that. So we'll go through, when we come back to AT 1 and 2, we might go through the 5 steps. But for Volume 2, it's going to be very prescriptive. We're going to be using the deemed to satisfy method of compliance. For the most part, we won't be trying to do any performance solutions. Actually, when we get to energy efficiency, we can say that we're going to use a 5-star energy rating for this building. Won't make you do the deemed to comply for all the energy efficiency because it takes a long time. So in the afternoon, we're going to start going through Volume 2. We're going to start looking at all the different clauses in there and what they mean to us and what we need to put on our working drawings. We're going to look at lists of what a good set of working drawings should contain as well. Okay? Leave it at that for now. Please do use your time to just browse around those websites that we've looked at this morning.